Okay, it looks like we're up and running here. Let's just give it a minute or so for folks to find us and filter in here. Let's get the stream running, hopefully here on Instagram. It is Monday, January 13th, 2025, the first Training Cafe episode of the new year. And I'm Hörst, of course, coming to you from my home today. I'm hunkered down in kind of work and winter training mode right now, as I imagine many of you are after kind of holiday travel and events around the holiday. January for me is kind of a quiet time unless I'm out shoveling snow or maybe get a day skiing in. Otherwise, it's my winter climbing training season, trying to get in shape, focus my conditioning for some spring climbing, and to kind of set the stage for having an effective climbing year ahead of me. And so that's kind of what the topic of today's Training Cafe is going to be all about, is the things you should be thinking about in terms of shaping your training program this new year, with the goal, of course, of upgrading your training program, taking what time and resources you have and making the most of it in terms of making yourself a better climber, a more fit and well-conditioned climber, and hopefully healthy and happy climber heading through the new climbing season. But of course, this is the Training Cafe, and at the beginning of every episode, I ask you to raise your cup, coffee, water, whatever you might be drinking. Maybe if you're in Europe, it's a time for the evening beer in Bavaria, in Germany. But let's raise our mugs and toast. Climbers around the world unite. Here at the Training Cafe. Okay, well, let's get rolling. I'm going to talk for, 10 minutes or so about my main topic for the day. And then I'll get to your training questions or questions on any topic: nutrition, injury, climbing technique, tactics, travel, climbing areas, whatever you want. I'll try to do my best to give you a good answer. And if I can't, I'll point you in the direction to where you can get an answer from a knowledgeable individual in that realm. So I think it's prudent, if you really are passionate about climbing performance, to not just make up your training and do it on make decisions on the fly, which is what a lot of people do. I've done that in the past, long ago, just kind of doing some home training or walking into the climbing gym and hanging out, climbing, socializing. And that can be fun, but it's not an effective strategy for really making yourself a stronger, better climber. And, at the other end of the spectrum are pro climbers who I am lucky enough to be able to hang around with and work with at times throughout the year. And it's really always impressive to me. I view myself as a very disciplined person, but some of the pros that I've worked with or climbed with take their dedication and discipline to a whole nother level that is just so impressive and inspiring for me as well. But that's what it takes to be really at the top of your craft. Now, most of us, perhaps most of you listening, aren't pros. You're more likely recreational climbers, weekend warriors, as we say here in the United States. And so, we're working a job or in school, have a family, have other obligations that we need to work around. And so maybe there's only 5 hours a week to train, or maybe if you're lucky, 10 hours a week. That's probably about where I'm at, 10 to 15 hours a week in terms of training. And I've been at this a long time in terms of, climbing and training for decades. And so for me to really benefit or advance in training it takes a lot of stimulus, a lot of volume. And while I don't train high intensity all the time, certainly not, I do train in a variety of ways that is quite voluminous compared to what, say, a newbie climber or someone climbing 5 or 10 years would do, because I just need so much more than that to be able to realize any further gains. But in any case, in terms of kind of evaluating your training program, trying to solidify a strategy for this new year, I guess as a starting point, just in terms of just science and kind of just the way things are, you need to do things differently this year than you did last year to reach the next level. You can't do the same things you did last year, the exact same workouts, the same frequency, the same schedule, maybe the same mistakes, the same flawed approach. If you just repeat that this year, well, you'll get pretty much what you got last year. And so you need to be creative, really investigate, and try to suss out what things you could do differently in the new year when it comes to your training. And a key word especially in the motor learning literature, when it comes to skilled movement, but also when it comes to training adaptations, a big word is novelty. You need to frequently introduce some new stimulus. It could be, a novel exercise. People are really into all these lifting edges. And if you've not done that before, that would be a new thing to add to the mix, as opposed to always do your training, your finger training in a hanging position. If you're fond of spray wall climbing or lead wall climbing in a gym, but you've not done any system wall climbing, well, then adding in a session a week on a kilter board or moon board or whatnot would be a novel thing to do for you. That would likely be quite challenging because it's new, but it would also help spur on some new adaptations. So think about that. What can you introduce that's novel? If you're a climber who just does traditional climbing specific training, there could be a place to do something generalized, like running, biking, swimming, some generalized aerobic activity, especially if you're a route climber. The cardiovascular conditioning, developing a stronger heart with a greater stroke volume, bringing down your resting heart rate, those will all feed back into making you a better route climber. It's proven. Now, if you're a boulderer, there's less of a payoff, though. I don't think it would be a waste of time, but it would maybe pay off and feedback. Let's say you start running for 30 minutes, 3 days a week. There would be more of a payoff for the route climber after several months of doing that than there might be for a boulderer. So again, think out of the box. When it comes to your workouts that are climbing specific, consider yourself, what exercises or what sessions you're putting in are focused on intensity. Like a system wall workout is typically pretty high intensity. A max hangs or max lifts finger workout is high intensity. These brief, repeated, intense contractions. Projecting at your limit, where you're always going deeply anaerobic, pumping out, fighting the pump and the fatigue and the pain to get to the top. That is high intensity. And certainly, I think climbers tend to be gluttons for punishment and gobble up and seek a lot of intensity. It's gratifying to be pushing your limits and to be fighting through the pain. But I think a lot of climbers do too much of it, which might be one reason we see so many climbing injuries, is just too much high intensity training and not enough kind of, let's call it zone 2 climbing, in terms of that more aerobic system powered climbing that is on an effort level an 8 or less out of 10. Whereas when you go to 8.5 or 9 or 9.5 or 10 out of 10, that's very anaerobic, very high intensity, and hard on the body. And you need doses of that, but it's actually many climbers, I believe, that I've worked with overdose on that high intensity training and don't accumulate enough volume in that kind of middle or moderate submaximal climbing zone. So if you have access to a good climbing gym with routes, with lead routes, or if you get on a spray wall and can kind of find that intensity level where you can climb through a pump, not pump out, kind of that threshold, aerobic, anaerobic threshold, that's kind of what you're after when you're trying to train more that aerobic energy system. And because you're grabbing larger holds and you're not going deeply anaerobic, those aerobic focused climbing sessions aren't so hard on the body. And they're a little more forgiving on the connective tissues because you're not grabbing teeny tiny holds or 1 or 2 finger pockets. You're grabbing much larger holds that you're not, putting quite the stress on the connective tissues. And so I seek for kind of an 80-20 balance out of a week of training. About 20% of my efforts are those all-out efforts, those high-intensity efforts. And then, 70 to 80% of my training is somewhat submaximal. And it really depends on what apparatus. I'm on a treadwall. Am I running? Am I climbing? To kind of ask myself, where should I be in this session when it comes to intensity? But that's something to think about. And then what about kind of, things like weightlifting, yoga, stretching, and some of those things, the yoga and the stretching, you could do some of that every day. It'd probably be a good thing to do a bit of that every day. I like the idea of just the human body getting some kind of a workout every day. I almost never take a day of total rest. A rest day for me is, maybe going for a 5-mile hike or walk with my wife, or going for an easy zone 2 run. That's kind of a rest day compared to, what I do in the gym or at the crag, which is more rigorous as a rule of thumb. A bit of weightlifting, yes, but you don't want to, if you're really serious about climbing, if it's your primary sport, you shouldn't be spending sessions at a CrossFit gym or doing excessive powerlifting or bodybuilding kind of workouts. That's counterproductive potentially if you bulk up, and it's just not very specific to climbing. It's a good supplement. I every week do 2 weightlifting sessions here at home. I have a deadlifting platform. So I do a few sets of deadlifts 2 days a week. I do a series of exercises for my shoulder and chest muscles and my rotator cuff muscles. Again, only 2 days a week. And those sessions I can do in 30 minutes or less. So I'm not, again, doing a bodybuilder workout where you're, hitting all the body parts and you're doing, 5 or maybe 10 sets bodybuilders might do for a body part. Nothing like that. You don't want to hypertrophy, muscles, especially the, non-climbing specific muscles. If you're doing, heavy enough and high enough reps, let's say at squatting, that your legs bulk up, that's going to be counterproductive for a rock climber. We are in a strength to weight ratio sport. So anybody who tells you weight doesn't matter, they're just lying, or they're just really ignorant, because all the strength to weight ratio sports, whether it's gymnastics or running, track and field, high jumping, bikers, cyclists are obsessive about body weight. They have really small upper bodies. All their size and muscle mass is in their legs, which makes sense because that's where the power is coming from. They obsess about cutting ounces from their body and their bike because when you're traveling distance, you have to carry that weight up and down hills. And same thing for a climber. The longer and steeper the climb, the more that weight is impactful. So if you're climbing short boulders, a few moves, or if you're climbing slabs, then it's not so weight sensitive. But as the routes get longer and steeper, they become more weight sensitive. And so you want to be training in ways that you get stronger, more powerful, you grow endurance, but obviously not hypertrophy and bulk up in the wrong places. I mean, now climbers do hypertrophy their upper body somewhat. Just like a biker has big legs, a climber is going to have a bigger upper body. But you look at the pro climbers, they tend to have relatively lean lower bodies. And so I didn't want to go off on a tangent there, but it's something to think about. I am a fan of weights. They have a purpose and a use, but it's not the same for climbers that it is for football players or bodybuilders. Nutrition, sleep, recovery. I won't go down those rabbit holes, but those are all things that you should evaluate as well here in this new year. You really should think about training and nutrition as opposite sides of the same coin. The training is the stimulus, and then the rest and the nutrition is what provides the recovery and the adaptations that you hope to get from the training stimulus. Training is catabolic. You are breaking down your body, and then you need to rebuild it stronger. And that happens from muscle protein synthesis and collagen synthesis that is ongoing throughout the day and the night. But a workout triggers or incites an uptick in protein stimulus. And so if you're protein deficient, it makes sense that you're not going to recover as quickly and potentially put yourself at risk of injury. A lot of injuries that occur in climbing, while they might seem acute, you might tweak a tendon or have a shoulder glitch or something. They tend to be, while maybe revealing in an instant, in a specific situation, there's often a build up to that. And that incident was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so you kind of think of this perfect storm that begins to brew when you combine, too much high intensity training, too little rest, too few off days, not enough sleep, not enough protein in your diet. You need a balanced diet that should be whole food based ideally. And, in the new year is a good time to try to refine your diet a little bit. I have, as kind of one of my New Year's goals, trying to reduce as much as possible my consumption of processed foods and seed oils and all the typical stuff. I'm not a huge consumer of those things, but I do have times where they seep into my diet in larger doses than would be ideal. Also, alcohol. While I'm not a huge drinker, I do typically have a few drinks a week, and so my New Year's resolution was, at least for the first 6 weeks of the new year, up until my birthday, which is on February 14th, I would be alcohol free. And so I've made it, 13 days so far without any alcohol in my diet, which there's obviously no benefit to alcohol other than, the social aspects or relaxation that you get from it. But there's no upside for a climber to consume alcohol or for an athlete. And, more and more, the evidence is that it's just poison that has a downside, but again, no real upside. And so I'm trying to fine tune the diet, trying to, get, sleep is something I struggle with getting enough of. So I'm trying to improve my game there a little bit. And then, of course, when I go to the gym, making it count. And the final thing before we move on to your questions, is having kind of, when you think a few weeks in advance, kind of the mesocycle as it's called. You think about your training week as kind of a microcycle, and then your training over the course of 2-3 months, 8, 10, 12 weeks is kind of the mesocycle. And that might be a more of a training cycle or training block that leads you into a period of performance climbing, whether it's outdoors, whether it's competition. If you're a competition climber, you need to plan things out in a logical way to try to peak for those periods of performance climbing. So for me, I kind of hope maybe I can get an early spring trip into the Red River Gorge in late February or March. So in my mind, I'm thinking about kind of prepping for that. And then I have a trip scheduled to Greece in April. So then I'm also thinking about how I can be well fit for those routes in Klimnos, and put together kind of a 3 or 4 month program to prep me up for those early season climbing ventures. And so the final few days or a week should be kind of a deload, where the volume is cut back and intensity can be high during that deload period, but the session should be very, very short. And so you want to kind of stay recruited, but allow the body to catch up in terms of coming out of a hard training period where you can oftentimes fall behind and need a little bit of a respite from the grind of the training cycle. So there you go. Hopefully that gave you some insights, some things to think about to craft an effective training program for the new year. And we'll now move on to a period here of 10 or 20 minutes of Q&A. So if you have a question, please type it into the comments box. The streaming interface that I'm using here only will show me, I believe, comments that are typed in on YouTube and maybe on the Facebook stream, though I'm not sure about that. If you're watching on Instagram, I don't believe that I can see your comments unless I can find them on my phone here. Let me just see if that's the case or not. I don't think so. But for the folks who have typed something in here to YouTube or Facebook that I can see, let's get going here. So looks like Peter from the UK, thanks for joining. We have Jeremy from Ontario, good to have you here. Marco from Italy has a question. How could I train the aerobic energy system without a climbing wall, just hangboard and campus board? Okay, very good question. And he's speaking here, obviously, about the climbing specific aerobic system. You can do generalized aerobic training just by going outside and running or riding a bike or doing a rowing machine or swimming. There are a variety of ways you could do kind of that zone 2 generalized aerobic training. But when it comes to the climbing specific muscles, targeted workouts or sessions that focus on being aerobically powered and not excessively anaerobic are valuable, especially for route climbers. I do a lot of that. So do the best route climbers, do a lot of that kind of sub-maximal route climbing. And so if you don't have a wall with the right angle and the right holds to kind of climb at a intensity of 7 or 8 out of 10, where you get a light pump, but you don't get excessively pumpy or pump out. That's kind of how you can find that threshold, is a light pump that you can steadily climb through without too much pain and suffering. That's kind of right where you want to be to fully call on the mitochondria to crank out as much ATP as they can via the aerobic energy system. But doing that with just a hangboard or campus board is challenging. Campus board, you can't really do much. But You can with a hangboard, but it often requires training at less than body weight, at probably, the critical force, according to most of the research, is around 30% of your maximum voluntary contraction. So if you know what weight on a hangboard, like body weight plus extra weight, is your, let's say, your max 7 or 10-second hang weight, 30% of that is the resistance you would want to do hanging, which would be quite easy, but you would want to be doing many, many repeaters. You could be doing 7 3 repeaters or 10-second on, 5-second off repeaters, and do that for 5 or 10 minutes straight. And again, if you're operating at 30% of your maximum voluntary contraction, you will be able to do that for many minutes in a row. Now, if you tried it at body weight, 10 seconds on, 5 seconds off, and you're on, say, a 20 millimeter edge, something that's a little less than 1 pad, which would be the ideal depth. If you're trying that at body weight, most people probably aren't able to go more than a minute or two. Because their body weight is more than 30% of what their maximum voluntary contraction is. So you need to either set up a counterweight system, a pulley with some weights hanging off one side and the other end clipped to your harness to pull weight off your body. And if you, like, I weigh 170 pounds. So if I put 70 pounds on the counterweight system, well, then I would be hanging at only 100 pounds. And I could surely at 100 pounds do 10-second on, 5-second off repeaters for several minutes in a row. Again, the goal would be to try to do that for 5 or 10 minutes, then maybe rest for 5 or 10 minutes, and then do another kind of set of long repeaters for 5 or 10 minutes. But the key is the resistance has to be quite low. You could put your toes on a chair to reduce body weight, or stand on something to shift your hips over and get some weight off your fingers. But the problem with that is it's hard to quantify exactly what the resistance is. So, again, with the counterweight system, you can calculate exactly what the resistance is. And with a little experimentation, get it right every session. You could use one of these force gauges. Pitch 6 here in the United States has a great force gauge that I use for testing and training in the Tindic unit out of Norway, I believe. Similarly, and you could use that type of a system to do a test of what your maximum voluntary contraction is, then calculate 30% of that, and it would be a good resistance to train at for the aerobic energy system. But the protocols have to be much different. Again, if you're doing max hangs, max lifts, well, then you're only hanging for 3 to 10 seconds, depending on the protocol, and then you're resting for a few minutes. That's a max strength protocol, but for aerobic training, it's got to be a much lighter weight, and it has to be many repeated bouts that accumulate many minutes of training. So hopefully that helped you out there. It can be done. It can be a little boring. It takes a little effort, but once you get into a groove and figure things out, it works and it's beneficial. If you're a rock climber, it's highly beneficial. Okay, so on we go here to Dennis. Says, my question for the day is, with limited access to a tall rope climbing gym, how can I stay strong for lead climbing or trad climbing in a bouldering gym? Also in hangboarding at home effective. Okay, well, I just answered the hangboarding part of that, Dennis. So you can just apply what I instructed Marco on how to train on a hangboard at less than body weight. In a climbing gym without long, tall lead routes and more of a bouldering gym, let's say, There's a few approaches. Getting on a spray wall that has a wide variety of holds and climbing 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off can be very effective. I do that on my Treadwall here at home. And the goal, again, is the 2 minutes on can't be like a 2 minute all out where you're just flaming and pumping and fighting to hang on for 2 minutes. That's just too high intensity. That's a very anaerobic. To be more of an aerobic focused session, it needs to be submaximal. You can get some pump, it just can't be excessive. It's got to be the pump you can climb through. I say that so often, but that's how you get it right, the intensity right. And so you get on a spray wall or traverse along the base of a lead wall or a bouldering area, or just climb a lot of really submaximal boulders. If you boulder V6, well then, V6 is kind of your limit. Go into the gym and just do a bunch of V0s, V1s, maybe a few V2s when you're warmed up, and just start, doing a bunch of them in succession with very little rest in between. And again, it should be physical and, create some fatigue and a light to moderate pump, but none of them should be maximal or get you anywhere near falling off or pumping out. And accumulating a bunch of those over the course of an hour would be great. When I go to a gym in Philadelphia that has great lead walls, what I will do there, kind of the rope version of that, would be selecting routes that are 2 or 3 or even 4 number grades below my limit. So my limit's mid 513. So I'm picking routes that are between 5.9 and 512A, let's say. And I'm doing a lot of them. I'll lap up and down on them. And over the course of a couple of hours, accumulate 1,000 feet of climbing, or maybe 40 to 60 minutes of total climbing time. And so I'm not really checking routes. I'm not there to climb hard. I'm there to really work on movement skills, aerobic training. You kind of think of those sessions as a runner would think of their base training. There's zone 2 running, which if you're a competitive runner, you put in a lot of mileage that is at a submaximal intensity. That's at kind of that threshold pace. So a route climber in particular needs to do that as well. Ideally year round, by the way, because that aerobic conditioning, while some of the adaptations are what I say are soft, they relate to enzymes and they can spin up quickly in a matter of days or a week or two. The more structural changes like capillary density and mitochondria capacity and density, those come over, those increases come over the terms of months and years. And so you don't spin them up overnight, nor in a few weeks or a few months. It's a longer time frame. And for a passionate route climber, you want to year over year increase your capacity to climb. And so kind of like the passionate runner that is running races every year or running marathons or 10Ks every year over year, their mileage often will be going up. Their total mileage for the year will be increasing a little bit each year because it's just what is needed to develop a stronger heart, more efficiency through the running system of their legs. And in our case, it's more upper body and, climbing positional efficiency that you gain. It's not just aerobic training, but there's so much more to what you're gaining by that climbing volume. Okay, I want to try not to be too long-winded here and blow through the rest of these questions here quickly so we can wrap this up. Looks like we have a couple more folks here from the UK checking in. Somebody here asks, what beverages can you dissolve your collagen in? And there's a good evidence basis for there being a value to supplemental collagen consumption. Collagen is the richest product on the planet for the amino acids glycine and proline, which comprise nearly 2/3 of our connective tissues. Those two amino acids are the building blocks for your connective tissues. So if you are stressing tendons, joints, ligaments, or have skin issues or skin repair issues, glycine is critical. It can be a rate limiting factor in remodeling those tissues. And so many diets are quite limited in glycine. Your body can only make about 2 grams of glycine a day, which is enough to get by if you're sitting on your ass at a computer all day. But if you're doing something physically rigorous where you're stressing and breaking down collagen throughout your body, the 2 grams that your body makes per day isn't enough. You need to consume some. And well, a food like pork has a lot of glycine in it, but who's eating pork every day? A lot of climbers eat very little meat at all, or maybe a few days a week. And so, you need some additional glycine in your diet, and that's where supplemental collagen is really the best way to do it. To answer the question, I mix it primarily in my pre-workout drink. The best time to consume supercharged collagen is about 30 to 60 minutes before you do your loading, whether it's finger loading, or 30 to 60 minutes before you go running, where you're loading your tendons and ligaments and joints through your lower body. Or if you're doing rehab of a particular body part, 30 to 60 minutes before your rehab, consume 15 to 20 grams of collagen is kind of what the evidence basis shows is quite valuable and beneficial if done consistently. Some people put it in their coffee. I mix it into my pre-workout. Or Physivantage Nutrition here in the United States makes 6 flavors of collagen. So it's really tasty just mixed into water, which I do pretty much every morning. I have a serving of flavored collagen in water to begin the day, and then another serving of it before I do my hard training for the day. So yeah, there's a variety of beverages, and some people mix the unflavored into coffee and hot chocolate and such. I'm not a big fan of that, but many folks I know do that as well. Okay, question here. Any tips for being a good climbing partner or finding partners? Yeah, I mean, that's finding the right partner is very important. Having a kind of a like-minded person, if you're someone that has a big appetite for climbing when you go to the gym or go to the crags, if you hook up with someone that only likes to climb half days, that's not a good match. And similarly, it's beneficial to have somebody that is of a similar ability. You can kind of relate to each other a little more. I mean, it's great to mentor newer climbers, lesser climbers. I do that quite a bit. And so I don't avoid climbing situations with people that are of a lower ability than me, but I most prefer climbing with people that want to work the similar kinds of routes. And when I'm heading out with a pro, I mainly belay or watch, because if they're working a 14 plus or a 15, I can kind of be more a coach's role or a belayer's role. That's tough. And depending where you live, certain places it might be quite easy to find the perfect partner, other places not. And I climb with my wife a lot. We've climbed together for 35 years. And although we're of very different ability levels, we try to find crags or sectors where we can each work on something that's appropriate and fun for us. So that's an important thing. I think just having somebody that is a good match when it comes to kind of temperament and desire to climb, kind of a similar amount in a given day is a really good thing. Okay, question here from Jeremy. If I prioritize protein on the high end of the daily consumption, can I safely cut weight, fat without sacrificing performance? That's a great question. And it's always a good question. And kind of personally, you wonder if you're trying to, like when I come out of my winter season, I'm often a few pounds heavy, just because I don't have quite the dietary surveillance during the winter training season that I do during the climbing performance season. But there are studies, quite a few of them, especially with track and field athletes, but I think they would, be representative of a climber athlete. And when you start to cut calories by reducing carbs and fats a bit in your diet, so that maybe you have a calorie deficit of a few hundred calories per day, and you do that over a few weeks or a month or two, and you can actually, drop a few pounds of, body fat, and not lose strength or muscle mass as long as you're consuming enough protein. And so, like you said, being on the high end of, you probably want to be around close to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So, you weigh 150 pounds. Well, if you're going to try to cut weight without losing muscle, you would want to be close to 150 grams of protein per day. And that's a tough amount of protein to eat from just whole food. You would need to eat, a few pieces of lean meat for sure, in addition to the protein you get from other foods like beans and vegetables and dairy, and you would probably need a few scoops of supplemental protein powder as well. I can easily get that 150 because my diet, I think on a typical day, just from whole foods, I consume 70 or 75 grams of protein on a typical day. But then through my collagen consumption and then my post-workout or before bed whey protein consumption, I easily get another 70 or 75 grams of protein. So I can cobble together on a consistent basis that 150 grams. So when I'm cutting weight, I'm not worried about losing strength or power. But if you're cutting calories and cutting protein at the same time, that is bad news. That opens you up to losing muscle mass and actually slowing your recovery from training and potentially slowing collagen synthesis and slowing the remodeling and recovering of your connective tissues. And so that opens the door to injury. And so those climbers who starve themselves, and especially that miss their protein requirements, are, again, that's part of the perfect storm of climbing injury, is a consistent protein, lack of protein in the diet. Okay. For rock climbers, do you have any advice for workouts that train power endurance, anaerobic lactic energy system on routes, as opposed to bouldering circuits like 4x4s? Yeah, I mean, bouldering circuits that are very challenging, those 4x4s are good for the lactic system, or just a simple spray wall session where you go 1 minute all out on the spray wall, and then you rest 3 or 4 minutes. So it's a partial recovery, not a complete recovery. So 1 minute all out. So when you're fresh, or at the beginning of a 1 minute burn on the wall, you would be grabbing the smallest holds, doing the biggest, most powerful moves you could do, and then you would be trying to do hard moves, all out kind of movements. But of course, as you get closer to the 1 minute, you're going to be losing power. So by necessity, you'll have to grab some bigger holds, and maybe not do as large of movements. And so that's one of my favorite interval training protocols. That's a little more simple than just, with the bouldering 4x4s, you have to pick problems, and you're confined to just grabbing the holds on those problems. And so, if you're on a system wall or a bouldering wall that has a bunch of routes in the right grade range for you, that can work. But if you don't have that, then it can be quite challenging. Where, again, you take a spray wall, or you have a home woody littered with a wide variety of holds of different sizes and shapes. You can just get on there and go all out for 1 minute, rest 3 or 4 minutes, get that partial recovery, then right back on and do 10 of those. That's an excellent workout. Another thing you can do to take it one step harder, if you're a more advanced climber, is to do that, that interval protocol I just described, 1 minute on, 3 to 4 minutes off, times 10, and do it with weight on. So add a 5 or 10 pound weight belt. And I will do that as I'm trying to kind of peak a training cycle, is shift to doing some weight, of those intervals at greater than body weight. You need to be very well warmed up. You need to not grab, when you're training with weight on, any holds that are very tweaky and potentially injurious. So your hold selection has to be a little more spot on. And you don't want to go so heavy with the weight that it compromises your technique. So if you start going 20, 30, 40 pounds, forget it. That's not good for this type of session, because you always want to be climbing with good technique, with good body positioning, and you get a lot of weight on. It's just hard to do that. But you add 5 or 10 pounds, ideally around your waist, or if it's in a vest, that's okay, but that can disturb, it's not quite as natural as a weight belt is. So my preference is to use a 5 or 10 pound weight belt for those type of things. So there you go. That's a good protocol that you can use. Any suggestions for training rock climbing with another sport over the winter? And I assume ski-mo, is that skiing? Should my climbing only be endurance focused? Could I do a power session once a week, or hangboard? It really depends, I guess. If you're a route climber, this summer you're going to be doing maximal sport climbing on steep routes, you need to be doing the climbing specific aerobic training all winter long. You just have to, like a runner, have that mentality of needing to get in your base training to maintain, as I mentioned earlier, your capillarity and your mitochondria capacity. That being said, I am more and more a fan of most climbers, and there's exceptions to this, but most climbers doing at least one session a week for all 3 energy systems. So even though you're putting some time into another sport, a winter sport, which is fine, I think that's nice for a break, to focus on another sport, but to try to get in one session a week for each of the 3 energy systems. So one anaerobic alactic session. Alactic is that brief all-out power that you have for 5 or 10 seconds. So that's like max hangs, campus training, short limit boulders. Like if you're doing a 5-move boulder on a kilter board, that's very alactic. Then the lactic sessions, the anaerobic lactic sessions, that's kind of the all-out 30-second to minute and 30-second, where you're getting very, very pumped, you're getting very acidy, your intercellular pH drops very low, your muscles get hypoxic because you're occluding blood flow, and because of that, those things, your forearm starts screaming at you. That's kind of the hallmark of those lactic sessions, doing one of those sessions a week, and then one of the more generalized, or I should say climbing specific aerobic, which is submaximal but high volume climbing. So aim for one workout a week of all 3 energy systems. And again, if you're a route climber, then the most important would be that 1 or 2 sessions a week of the climbing specific aerobic training. Okay, and the last question here, and then we'll wrap things up, from Dean, is a Treadwall very beneficial for training? And I would answer that it depends. But the main answer is yes. I'm a big fan of Treadwall training. I've had one for, I guess probably 10 years now at my house. And I spend a lot of time on it. And my sons, when they were young and still lived here, they're young adults now and live in Utah. But when they lived here, they put a lot of mileage in on the Treadwall. And for a route climber in particular, it's a wonderful tool. The problem is Many people get a Treadwall and don't know how to use it properly. And I know this when we first got it. The temptation is to get on there and climb until you pump out. And then get back on and climb again until you pump out. And if you do that, then all you're ever training is the lactic energy system. If you're training to failure, you're climbing 1, 2, 3 minutes till your forearms explode and you fall off the wall, that every climb, every session becomes a lactic training session. And that is very ineffective training if that's all you do, obviously. Doing that once or twice a week, probably a good thing. But there's just so much more to an intelligent training program. And so you need to know how to use the Treadwall. And so I have over a decade come up with a lot of different protocols that I won't get into here, using different size holds. You can make something that's, more alactic by grabbing tiny holds and only climbing for 15 seconds. And doing repeats like that could be more lactic oriented. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you could climb on big holds where you only get moderately pumped, light to moderate pump, and climb 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, and do that for a half an hour, and that would be very aerobic. So there are ways to use the Treadwall to train all three energy systems. So with an open mind and the discipline to execute very specific protocols on the Treadwall, it's a great tool, especially, for me, the nearest gym with roped, good steep route climbing is over an hour away in Philadelphia. And so I just can't drive there 2 days a week to do routes. I might go there 10 times a year. That's it. My Treadwall is the tool that I use to do most of my climbing specific aerobic training during when I'm in my home training mode. So hopefully that helps you out there, Dean. And with that, I guess I'll wrap up this episode of Training Cafe. To each and every one of you, thank you for joining in for this episode. I try to do these once or twice a month, usually at noon on a Monday. I try to give a couple hours of notice. So if you follow the Training for Climbing YouTube channel or Facebook page or Instagram, you will usually get a notice sometime in the morning, 10 or 11 a.m. Eastern time here in the US, that I am going to go live with the Training Cafe. And spread the word. If you know somebody who would enjoy this type of conversation, let them know. Have them follow the Training for Climbing page somewhere on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook. And even if you go to trainingforclimbing.com, that's my website, which is a deep resource of articles that you can peruse for free. If you go to trainingforclimbing.com, there'll be a little pop-up box. You can enter your email to join our mailing list. And I send out 1 or 2 emails a month. Very limited. I'm not going to spam you with daily emails or anything like that, but you'll get 1 or 2 emails a month with some training tips. And so you might enjoy that as well. So I guess I'll sign off. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Hopefully you are going to be able to design and execute a better training program this year than you did last year, and that'll set the stage for perhaps your best climbing season ever here in 2025. See you soon. Take care.